Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Frances Shefter, Principal of Shefter Law. You can get more details and catch prior episodes at www.shefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Frances Shefter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today's special guest is Laurie Chester, who is an ADHD academic and life coach with Get It Done ABC. Laurie, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience?
Hello, I'm very glad to be here today to share a little bit about what I do as a coach. I am located in Northern Virginia, and I've been coaching for about 20 years now.
So, what is coaching? Because everybody says they're a coach and they can coach you, but what does that mean?
Well, coaching is. I first off like to point out that coaching is different from therapy, and that coaching, while therapy is kind of designed to figure out how you got to now, and what your background is, what's happened in the past. Coaching is about helping clients figure out where they want to go and how to get there. Coaching is a collaborative process. I am not an authority figure. I am just somebody to be a support person and to help guide people to where they want to go, in whether it's in life with life coaching or academics with people who are still in school.
Go ahead.
It involves a lot of me asking questions and trying to help clients increase their self-awareness of what their strengths are, most importantly, but also where they might need some help and some support to shore up their weaknesses.
So how does that work in the academic setting? Because, I know, I remember when I was in high school, who knew where we wanted to be and what we wanted to do?
Right. And I when I work with young people, middle school, high school, I emphasize with them that I empathize with them and say, I get that there's pressure on you to figure out what you want to do, and you're only 16 and, you don't have a clue. So it's really important to help young people kind of figure out what they like and what they don't like, and what they should gravitate towards as opposed to perhaps what their parents are pushing towards. And that's a fine line for me. Obviously, parents hire me, but I'm working for the student. One of the things I like to say to young people, and this is somewhat age dependent. I work with my youngest right now is 6th grade. I do work with middle school kids, but primarily high school and older. But I like to tell them that, and I warn the parents that I'm going to say this, that I see part of my job is helping the student to get their parents off their back. And by that, I don't mean to, downgrade parents or, anything like that. But what I explain to the kids is that, parents aren't having any more fun nagging you than you are listening to it. And my role is to kind of help parents step away from that role of monitoring where the kids' grades are, what homeworks are missing, and what the homework is, and all that stuff. But I work with the student to try to help them set goals for individual classes, and to be realistic. I preface. I use a goal sheet usually at the beginning of the year, and that I have them fill out. And I preface it by saying, I know everybody thinks they need to say they want to have straight A's. And if that's what you want, that's fine. That's a fine goal, certainly. But I also want you to think about what's a realistic goal. And but then how are you going to achieve that goal? And this process is designed to help them think about what they need to do, what they're going to need to have on board in order to accomplish their goals. But then also to look at what are the potential risks or down obstacles to you accomplishing your goals. And this can be something like I've got a lot of friends in the class, and that can be a distraction, or keeping up with the homework. This teacher gives a lot of homework, and I need to watch out for missing assignments.
Okay.
So I help them try to come up with their own goals for their classes and, overall their academic life, but also with a little bit of trying to get life balance in there too. What are your goals outside of school?
Right. I want to go back to getting your parents off your back, because as a parent, I was like, wait, I can pay somebody to do that? Like, I don't want to be on my kid's back. I want to play
Yes.
games with them. I don't want to have fun. I don't want to be like, did you do your homework? Did you do this? Did you do that? Because it's frustrating for them as well as me. So I'm thinking you give the kids more independence by helping teach them, right?
And it's practice in using a resource. I explain to them we all use resources. I don't frankly do my gardening work because I kill plants. That's just
Me
not my
too.
forte. So I hire somebody to help with taking care of some of my yard stuff. I hire somebody to cut my hair, because if I cut it, it would be silly. But so it's practice in using resources, because some of these people, they might need well, we all need resources regardless.
Right.
So it's practice and independence in that realm. And as far as what I say to parents is, I'm not out to disparage you at all. And much of what your student is going to hear from me, they will have already heard from you. But there's a chance that they'll listen to me because
Exactly.
I'm not you.
Yep.
But I said I do think that you get credit for it back in the recesses of their minds, where they think, maybe mom did know what she was talking about.
Right. Exactly.
So it really legitimizes what you've been saying. But the other part of it, what I say to parents too, is that as time goes on and kids get to be, in their teen years, you want to be careful how you use your parenting chits, and that you don't necessarily want to be using them looking at every homework assignment and being sure it gets done, because you need to have the strength as a parent to step into issues that might be much more important, frankly, than whether there's a missing geometry homework. So it benefits the parent and the student to have an outside person kind of keeping watch as much as or a little as is necessary. I also assure parents that if I see stuff that I'm worried about, I'll let you know. If things are tanking, I may need to let you know. If your student says something to me that worries me, and I explain that to students as well, that I do need to share that with your parents. But otherwise, if you need to come into my office or our Zoom meeting and say a few things about how your parents are driving you crazy, it's not going to go any further than me.
Right.
So
It's building that trust and
yeah,
rapport.
yeah, exactly.
When you were talking about setting the academic goals, I'm assuming you help them make realistic, because like somebody might have a goal of getting straight A's and being the star of the football team, but can't throw a football or catch a football at all.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
is maybe not quite as bright as a straight A student, although I don't totally believe that, because I think everybody could get straight A's. So do you talk through like what the reality of that is?
Yeah, I think okay, how are you going to get to that goal? is
Got it.
where we can do that. Is what's your first? What are the steps? And of those steps, what is the first thing that you need to do um, to be able to throw that football? Okay, well, I need to practice. Okay, so how do you do that? Can you practice alone, or do you need to have somebody there that you're throwing the football back and forth, or somebody who can teach you how to throw it? So kind of breaking down, and sometimes, coaching is about asking powerful questions so that the client comes up with an answer. That doesn't mean that I don't make suggestions, and put out, a menu of ideas if it comes to that, if they're struggling to find an answer. Well, maybe this or that, and what do you think of those things? And we might sort of analyze those. So yeah, we try to bring it to an attainable place by looking at the steps involved in getting there.
Right. Because there's only so many hours in the day. And so,
Right,
right.
right. And, and I absolutely have people who are strong writers, but have a lot of trouble in math, or vice versa. And that maybe having, the A as a goal, if it's, a pre-calc class, and your history is not terribly strong in math, that, that might be not easily achievable. But then there's also if you really want that, what do you need to do to get there? Well,
Right.
okay, I need to go to the teacher's office hours. Maybe I need a tutor, that kind of thing.
Right. It reminds me of in college. I remember one semester a professor saying, you're gonna all get C's in my class. And I was, no, I'm gonna get that B. And I worked my butt off and I got that B, but I got C's in all my other classes because I put so much time into that one class. And it's like, oops, maybe I should have spread it out a little, took the C and got B's at everything else. But it's time management, right? And finding that balance.
So when I meet with the client, we look at, how their first quarter grades have just come out for most of my kids. And so we will be looking at, so how are you feeling about these grades? What went well, what didn't go so well, so that we can then set goals for the next marking period or for the rest of the semester to try to accomplish what you want to do.
Right. Makes sense. And then, executive functioning skills, that's like everybody's talking about executive functioning skills. How do you teach what are executive functioning skills? So how does coaching help with that? For people that don't understand what executive functioning skills, how would you define those?
I define them as kind of being the dashboard of your life. First of all, I introduce them with a little bit of very lay brain science, which is, your brain develops from the back to the front. The front is the last thing. This part behind your forehead is the last to develop. And that's where the majority of these things called executive functioning skills take place. And, we used to think that those executive functioning skills and that part of the brain was fully developed by, early adolescence. But with non-invasive imaging that we've been able to do for the last, 20, 30 years, what we've learned is that part of the brain isn't completely developed until upwards of 25 to 30. So, when you hear the term somebody was a late bloomer, that's probably part of what was going on, was that the frontal lobe hadn't come on board fully until later. People with ADHD are said to run as much as 30% behind developmentally. So there, your 16-year-old may be trying to manage executive skills, intensive tasks with a brain that's really more like a 13, 14-year-old. And that can be helpful to parents to help them understand. Then I kind of outline the things that I consider to be executive functioning skills. I'm not an expert in that. And there are, depending on who you talk to, there's 6, 12, 20 executive functioning skills. But I kind of focus on the time management, organizing, planning and prioritizing, working memory, observation skills, stress tolerance, task initiation, which is a huge one, and
And
those sorts of
completion.
things. Well, yes, that's true, but the initiating part is what leads to procrastination and putting things
Oh, right.
off. So that's the one. The task initiation is an issue that I see across all ages, as being the most common. So I try to explain it to them, to say, so see if we, and I have them, when I first start working with somebody, I will have them do an assessment on their executive skills, just to get their read on it. And depending on their age, I also typically have the parents do an executive skills assessment on the kid. And it's interesting sometimes to see where the parent says they're strong or weak, especially, and the kid is like, I'm good across the board.
Right.
But then things might come to light as we're getting to know each other and work together, that, okay, so this is, I see you have a lot of papers that aren't put anywhere. They're just stuffed into your binder. These are organization skills, and let's walk through how to manage your paper load. Less of an issue now than it was 10 years ago, but paper is still, management is still an issue for some.
Right. It's just now electronic paper, right?
Yeah.
So then, like, I know you say you work mainly with the kids. How do you help the parent? Like, I'm thinking about it as coming from the parent side of, I've hired an expert to work with my child. How do you let the parent know what progress and what you're working on? Does that make sense?
It's interesting. It depends a lot on how much the parents want to know. There are some parents of kids that I work with that I have very little contact with, actually. I'm very upfront at the beginning. I don't guarantee grades. I can't make them do the work. And I can't make them do it correctly into whatever teacher's specifications might be. Some people, I will send an email update every week after I see somebody, just to give them an idea of what we worked on and what I'm seeing. It's kind of student dependent and parent demand dependent. Yeah.
That makes sense, because sometimes, you hire the professional, like that's why we outsource, like you said with the planting. I kill plants. I used to, when I lived in Florida near my mom, I would bring a half dead, plant that was almost dead to my mom and switch it out for a live one, and she'd bring it back to life, and then I'd switch. So it looked like I could keep a plant alive, but mom was doing it. So it just, how much do you want to be involved, and what do you want to be doing?
Yeah. There's some of that. Now I had a girl I was working with a number of years ago. I think she was in 9th grade in a large public school at the time, and I remember her telling me that I got a text message from my mom during my history class. She had been on Power School and had found that I was missing this assignment, and she sent me a screenshot of it. And I said to her, "Mom, you can't be doing this while I'm in school." And so, I mean, that was an instance where I very delicately talked to the mom and said, I'm watching this. So, and if I see stuff that, you really need to know, I will let you know. But I ask of you that you work on stepping back from that, because she was checking Power School like every day, multiple times a day, that kind of thing. She was really very into it, and she was very receptive. And I was delicate in my presentation, but and she did back down and or back off a little bit, which helped her relationship with her daughter.
I'm sure.
And her daughter did just fine. She's a sophomore at University of Tennessee now.
Oh, wow.
So, she got through high school just fine, and she's doing fine.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard as a parent because you want to make sure your daughter, your children are doing well, and everything's happening. But, it's we got to let them learn to fly on their own. And if we don't do it while they're living in our home, what's going to happen when they go away to college, right?
There's also this interesting, and I don't know if there's actually real science behind this, but just sort of observationally, there's this interesting developmental leap that kids seem to take kind of between sophomore and junior year of high school or during junior year. And I call it something that I won't repeat here, but I call it the "oh darn it" year. And the "oh darn it" year is junior year when you realize, I oh darn it, I only have one more year of high school. I need to get my stuff together
Yeah.
and figure this out. And there does seem to be a shift in kids sort of during that junior year period, and certainly relative to sophomore year. And I think it's a executive functioning, a frontal lobe development
Which
that
makes
helps.
sense. Yeah, which makes sense because if you look back at developmental milestones, like when I was a teacher and stuff, and I remember in first grade, a child can't read, can't read, and then all of a sudden they're reading like crazy because that switch, like just all of a sudden it connects and they get it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's probably what's happening, in high school. Because I know it's also happened to all of us in law school. It's like you couldn't understand what the teachers wanted, and then you just take your exams. And it's like, oh, that's how we do law,
Which is, that's another thing that is important to remember with students, and something that I say to them, and remind parents of sometimes, that when a student gets especially to high school, they're now working for 7 bosses. None of us are working for 7 bosses
Oh,
that have
yeah.
different rules and different expectations, and you're spending X amount of time with them every other day, in most cases, in a block scheduling kind of format. And that it takes time at the beginning of a school year, like this first quarter. It takes time for the student to get the hang of how each teacher
Yeah.
operates. And as I'm sure it's the same for the teacher as well, is how getting a feel for their students. But the student has to get a feel for how the teacher grades, what their expectations are like, what their demands are, how flexible they are, and all of that. How quickly they update the grade book, all those things. And that is something that I work on with the students, is reminding them that, so that's just the way this teacher is, or for my college students, that's the way this professor is. But I can almost guarantee you that if you reach out to them for help, they will be receptive, and they would much rather hear from you as a 9th grader than hear from your parent. That it's better for you to be working on that. So self-advocacy is another kind of adjunct thing that we work on for some kids. I have a current 10th grade guy who is an awesome email writer. Conversely, I have a 7th grade girl who she drafted an email to a teacher about a missing assignment recently, and I said, before you send it, would you read it back to me? She had no salutation. She just was, I don't know what happened to such and such, can I get another copy? And that was it. So working on, okay, we need to change the wording a little bit, add a dear
How
so
we say it. Right.
always say thank you. And working on some of those skills as well that go along with growing up.
Right. The basic skills that you don't, you don't think about, that kids need to be taught that, like I do a lot of work in the abuse and neglect system in DC in the foster cares, and well, also in Montgomery County, but that's personal side. But yeah, like it just, I've had social workers say, well, they're 18, they should know how to do that. And I'm like, really? Who taught them that? And it's that reality check of, and it's the same with our kids, even that aren't in the abuse and neglect system, and all kids. Most families now are two working, both parents
Yep.
are working. We don't have the time to sit them down and be like, oh, this is what you need to do, and this is how you do it. This is the language you should use. So
Mhm.
you are able to step in and help with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I do that with some frequency. With both, I have a college student who's a senior at JMU, and she has a difficult sociology class that she's in, and that's not her major. And she had another test coming up, and she's in the C range with her grade, and she is afraid to go see him during office hours. So I have suggested over the last few weeks, how about you just email him? He'll either answer or he won't.
Right.
But it takes away that sort of personal fear of rejection a little bit. And then after our call, I said, okay, when are you going to do it? Oh, I'll do it today. And I said, and I'd like to hear from you after you've done that, so that we build in a little accountability piece there.
Right.
And she did email him, and he was helpful. And she did well on the test. She got an 85 on the test.
Oh, good job.
So, yeah. So it, not to belabor the self-advocacy point, but I think it's really a lot of what I do with students is really, when it comes down to it, these are life skills, things that are going to be important for them no matter what they do in life, both in their personal lives and professional lives.
Right. And it's, I know for me, doing the self-advocacy, like, builds self-confidence. Because it's like, you're so afraid to do it, Just the same thing as procrastination of things. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. Once you've done it, it's like, oh, wait, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Like, I can do this.
Yes.
And then it just gets easier.
So when we identify some of those executive functioning skill deficits that somebody might have, there are strategies that I will kind of put on, I don't know if it's maybe a crookedly worn coaching hat, and share some strategies that can be helpful. And one of the strategies that I share with kids on task initiation is trying to use what I call a 10 or 15-minute burst, which is committing yourself to doing it, whatever it is, just for 10 minutes. You only have to do it for 10 minutes. Set a timer, whatever works, but you only have to do it for 10 minutes. And, somebody might say, well, I know it's going to take me a lot longer than that. And I said, well, it might, yeah. But the point is, you're not able to get yourself to do it right now. So maybe if you chunk it into a piece by time, or, I'm only going to do 5 problems on the 20-page homework sheet, that will get you started. And I said, the little trick to this is that very often, once you get started, the 10 minutes goes by and you look at, and the buzzer goes off and you think, oh, well, I only have another 10 problems to do. I might as well keep going. And you're more likely to keep going and accomplish the task.
Right. As my uncle used to say, that 99% of working out is getting yourself to the gym.
Yeah.
Because once you're there, but that's it. And it's the same thing. Once you start, it's the starting that I know for me also with procrastinating stuff. It's the starting that gives me the anxiety and stress. And then once I started, it's like, oh, okay. And then finishing is much easier. So I see where that helps.
And the same can be true with organizing. I had a girl once years ago who was incredibly disorganized, and the papers in her backpack were like all over the place, but she was very, very, very anxious about throwing anything away, or doing anything about it. So we did a 10 pieces of paper limit. We'll just handle 10 pieces of paper, and that's all. And
chunking.
Yeah,
we call in the IEPs chunking.
That's what she was able to do, and that's what we did. We didn't make a whole lot of progress very quickly, but it at least started to contain the issue.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's, progress quickly. I know a lot of times parents might, and the kids themselves might have expectations that are not realistic when it comes to that. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, a little bit of progress goes a long way, and you
Yes.
don't realize that it takes time to build. So when you
Right.
work with clients, is it like, is it like a 6 month and a year, 4 years? What is the time period usually?
It's very, very individual dependent. I have an adult that I've been working with, I think, for about 11 years.
Wow.
Um, and, we have not solved some of her issues. But what another part of coaching that's important to remember is that coaching provides accountability.
Yeah.
And I had a girl a number of years ago who I had worked with. I think I started working with her in 8th grade. And at the end of junior year, I was still working with her. I said to her, and she was one who didn't have much contact with the parents. Um, I remember saying to her at the end of the school year, you know, I'm just trying to get an idea, but do you think you want to return? Do you want to work with me next year, the senior year? And she kind of was puzzled by the question. And she said, well, if you'll have me.
Aw.
And I said, well, of course I'll have you. I'd love to keep working with you. But I said, I don't think you need me anymore. And she thought for a minute. She said, well, but she said, you know what? I know every week when I come here, I know what you're going to ask me. I know what I said I was going to do. And so I always take time to be sure that I have either done what I said I was going to do, that I will be able to answer your questions. And she said that really helps keep me on track. So same with my adult. It's like sometimes she can't get stuff done on her own. Sometimes she does things during one of our calls. She'll write an email or send a text that she's been putting off on the call because she just needed that body double
Right.
aspect of coaching. But a lot of it is an accountability piece.
Yeah.
So I do have people that I work with for maybe 6 months, and we kind of go through things. I give them some strategies on time management, explain time blocking, maybe some stuff on organization, task initiation, etc., and study skills, which I also will work on with kids. And then they go on their merry way. Other kids I might work with throughout high school, in part because I'm filling that space that maybe the parents aren't able to do right now
Right.
for whatever the reason is. So it can be a short or long-term process.
That
Um,
makes sense. It's just,
and
and it's interesting that she said, will you have me? Because what immediately came to my mind is that when kids have IEPs and they start doing really well, and sometimes schools will try to take the IEPs away.
yes,
And I've heard parents with that all the time. And I'm like, they're doing well because they have the supports in place. If you take them away, they are going to fail. And it's that argument. And I usually put it to, that's like saying, okay, the person in the wheelchair can now get from A to B, so they don't need the wheelchair anymore.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the thing. It's like, so with coaching, it's you need that extra accountability and that extra checking in and making sure that's understandable. I can
And
see why. Yeah.
there's a lot of what I do that is very repetitive. That we do the same thing at the beginning of a session, for after we get through the few minutes of what have you been up to, what did you do over the weekend, that kind of stuff. But it becomes predictable, and the goal behind that is that I'm modeling what I hope they will start to do at home, which is usually looking at their grade book, looking at their portal, and figuring out what they need to do and when they need to do it. There's an interesting piece to the homework on the school's portals, and that is that I always pull up, if it's possible, depending on the school's portal. Um, I pull up the calendar view of their work because I want to give the student a chance to see time. because they have a very poor sense of time and the passage of time. So if you tell somebody on a Monday that it's not due till Friday or next Monday, that's like so far in the future, it's off their radar.
Right.
But if they look at it as a series of days on a calendar and they say, "Oh, I have 2 away games on Tuesday and Thursday, and, oh, I'm in a tournament this weekend, or we're going to visit our grandparents that weekend. I won't be able to oh, I really better start it tomorrow."
Right. Long-term
Because of
planning.
yeah,
Yep.
the long-term planning.
Which makes sense. It's, I know my daughter will be like, well, it's not due till Friday. I'm like, yes, but on Thursday you have this, and on Wednesday you have this, and on Tuesday you have that. And then she's like, oh, so let's do a little bit now and a little bit tomorrow. And then she's like, oh, okay. She fights me sometimes, but then she'll, realize like, oh, it's Friday and it's not done,
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like,
right.
I guess I can turn it in Monday and work all weekend, which is no fun.
Which
Well,
nobody
that's
wants to do,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And then I want to touch on a little bit, and I don't know if we can a little bit, but like I know COVID impacted these kids so much,
Mhm.
and every age level, every grade, it's they missed out on this or they missed out on that and they missed out on that. Do you see a big difference in our kids in their needs of learning this stuff due to the COVID era?
It's very hard for me to put my finger on it, but yes, I definitely see an impact, and I especially well, because of the age group that I work with, it kind of eliminates the younger kids to an extent, but the transition from high school to college for some kids has been especially difficult because they missed a big hunk of high school, especially if they were in a school system or at a school that stayed virtual pretty much for a full year and a couple months. Um, they forgot how to be students
Right.
to a degree. And so when they got back to being students, their focus really, I think, was to, at least to some extent, was trying to figure out how to be social again
Yep.
and how to, most of them had pods of friends that they still saw, but very different from being in the kind of constant social milieu of high school and interacting with teachers and managing expectations, some of which were lowered pretty low and then brought back up. And it's been hard for them to stair step back to the higher level of expectation. So I work now I have far more college students than I used to have. And I think that's very much a result of missed learning during high school
Which makes
when things
sense
were.
because yeah, you only have so much brain power, and trying to do the academic and the executive functioning and the social and all of that, it makes it hard. So having somebody help you organize and just think through makes a lot of sense.
Right, right. And the having to, simply get up at a certain time, get dressed, and get out of the house. Those were
Oh
big
yeah,
deals.
right,
Those were big deals when you could no longer stay in your pajamas and sit on your bed.
right. Roll out of
That's
bed, put a like
a big switch.
yeah.
And speaking of getting out of bed, that's one of the things that I do advocate with parents. I don't make it my business to tell them what to do, but one thing I will tell them, suggest that they do strongly, is not be the responsible for getting their kids out of bed in the morning,
Mm,
at least by the time they graduate from high school. That it's a
makes sense.
huge life skill that kids need to figure out a way to get up, whether it
Yeah, that
takes
makes
5
sense.
alarm clocks or, an atomic bomb alarm clock, which does exist. We owned one once, and, because that's what will be the downfall of kids when they get both to college and beyond. I have
Right.
adults that I work with that struggle with getting up, and
Yeah, that makes sense.
can it jeopardize jobs and your standing in class.
Right. That totally makes sense. This has been so awesome and amazing. So how can people, I know you said you're in Northern Virginia and you have an office. Do you only service clients in that area or
No, I work with college students now virtually. I've got somebody in Michigan and somebody in Tennessee and somebody in Pennsylvania. I have a high school girl in Pennsylvania. So, what COVID did do for me was that it forced me into the virtual world. And so I see some local kids I see in person, but otherwise I do work virtually. So I can meet with students on Zoom usually. And I usually ask for access to their school portal so I can see what they are doing. But I have students who are in school in DC and in Northern Virginia. I don't have anybody in Maryland right now. I haven't had
Because we
a
don't
lot of
cross the
Maryland.
bridge.
Well, as Virginians don't cross
Right.
into Maryland either.
Exactly.
So
We don't want to cross
it's
the
a
bridge.
strange phenomena, but it does exist. Yeah.
Yeah, only people that grew up here really get it. Yeah, we'll all go to DC, but Virginia and Maryland,
Yes, it's a different story, right?
right.
But with virtual platforms available now, it's a little bit different. So
That makes sense. And how can people reach you? I know we're going to have some of the stuff in the show notes, but just for those our listeners now, how can people reach out to you to get, if they want to find out more, if they want to start services with you?
the best ways to reach me, I no longer at this juncture have a website, unfortunately, but is by email, which is my business name, getitdoneabc@comcast.net, or by cell, either text or phone, 703-819-5829. And those are the two best ways to reach me. Oftentimes I'm a school's academic center or support services may well have me on a list somewhere, and some of the local psychologists who do testing are also familiar with me. So and with coaches in general. So
right.
if not me, then somebody else who's also been trained. I have done specific training in ADHD coaching, so that's a kind of a niche. But basically, what you do with somebody who has ADHD is relevant to somebody who doesn't. It's
right.
It's not
life
that.
skills.
It's life skills, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. This has been so wonderful, Laurie. Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing all of your wealth of information with our listeners.
Well, thank you, Frances, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Stress-Free IEP with your host, Frances Shefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Frances through shefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.